Right, well, everyone, good to be back. Pirkei Avos, Ethics for Fathers. Again, I want to welcome holding by Pirkei Avos, Ethics for Fathers, chapter 16, part 65. Right, we had a break for a week just because of the war, but I think we're going to continue, and hopefully things will be good. Again, I want to welcome holding by Pirkei Avos, Ethics for Fathers. We are in chapter 2. Right, we are in chapter 2, Mishnah 16. And this is part 65, so there will be a part 66, there'll be a part 67, right? I am sure. 1 second. All right. All right, let me get back here 1 second. Oh. All right, that's what I wanted to see. Very good. So we are holding again by chapter 16. This is part 65. We spoke 2 weeks back. About the end of the Mishnah. Because the end of the Mishnah says, name of Rabbi Yeshua, we said evil eye, evil inclination, hatred of other people, remove a person from this world. So, right, the question was, what exactly does that mean? What type of hatred right? What type of hatred are we speaking about? So, in general, we mentioned that the hatred is unlawful hatred, right? Unlawful hatred means I have no reason to hate the other person, right? Unlawful hatred is what destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, right? Second temple, Sinas Chinam, right? Unlawful hatred, right? Destroyed the temple, and we're still don't have a temple in Jerusalem today. So we do understand that it's still, it's still a problem. Even though we said before that King Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, he says it's time to love, time to hate. Right? Time to love, time to hate. So what does that mean? What does that mean to hate? Right? The Torah says, can't hate another Jew in my heart. By non-Jew, I could hate a non-Jew. No offense. Could certainly hate non-Jews if I wanted to, but probably not a good thing to do in general. Brings up a lot of bad things, as we spoke about. But here, what do we speak about? We spoke about the idea that there are people, right? There are people that don't like being around other people. Yeah, they're introverted. Maybe they're shy. They don't like to be around people per se. Even though, again, doesn't mean they necessarily hate people per se. Whatever maybe they have anxiety around people. They have other issues around people. Okay. Or they do things that cause other people to hate them. Right? In other words, they cause people to not like them. Right? So we spoke quite a bit about that. So it says, Moed Rebbe, Arav Agon, Ramosh Tar Machslita should be well. And he brings down his commentary in Pirkei Avos. And he says, first of all, hatred of others, we understand, very bad character trait, right? That we understand. He says, included in this are people that are Porish Minat Tzibor. Porish Minat Tzibor means they separate from the community. Now, separating from the community, never a good thing. Right? Certainly never a good thing. It comes on the Rambam, right? And the Rambam makes very clear that there are 24 things that stops the person from true repentance. Right? 24 things. One of them is separating from the community. Now, we mentioned this before, so just mention it sort of in passing, right? And that is that there are people who want to convert to Judaism, and let's say they can't move. Let's say for whatever reason, family-wise, financial-wise, they can't move within walking distance of an Orthodox synagogue. Now, this is really has to be done. Right? Doesn't mean you can't take classes, whatever, up until that point, but has to be done. Right? Because how are you going to learn how to be a Jew if you don't live amongst Jews? Right? So some people come up with this clever idea, and they'll say, well, doesn't say anywhere. Doesn't tell me in the Torah. Right? Torah doesn't tell me, right? Doesn't tell me in the Torah, doesn't tell me anywhere that I have to live amongst Jews. Right? It doesn't say in the Torah, doesn't say in the Talmud, doesn't say in the early commentators, later commentaries. Okay, very good. Right? Maybe it doesn't. But what's the obvious question? The obvious question is, you want to be a Jew. How are you going to be a Jew if you don't live amongst Jews? Yes, it could be. I heard someone say, maybe 400 or 500 years ago, living amongst Jews, maybe you could understand what to do and what you're obligated to do by osmosis. Back in the day, people on a higher level, people could seek, people could imitate, whatever. But maybe it was less of an issue. Yeah, today, for sure, you can't say that. Right? Today, that's an impossibility to say. Because if you don't live amongst Jews, you won't know what it means to be a Jew. So there are some rabbinical courts, not too many, but there are some that will obligate a person, in the process of conversion to live with the family. for a certain amount of time. Now, for some it's not so practical, but in general, why would they do that? Because you see on a daily basis, maybe you won't want to be a Jew after this, after seeing how, families interact and all that. But at the end of the day, you see how it works. In other words, you see people making blessings. You see how they keep Shabbos, right? You see, in general, what a person does on a daily basis. So when you see what they do on a daily basis, right, it makes a major difference. A major difference. In other words, a person lives on their own. Okay, imagine before YouTube, right? For some people can't imagine that. But imagine before YouTube, right? So you get information and you can get knowledge by reading books. You get probably a lot of knowledge, a lot of books, a lot of good books out there today in Jewish law, Jewish philosophy, right? And, certainly in English. There's no question. Obviously, some of them have been translated to other languages. Very good. So that you can get certain knowledge. Certain knowledge you can get. But at the end of the day, book knowledge, which is good, but book knowledge not the end all things. Now, if it's before YouTube, right, we'll make it very simple here. If you didn't have YouTube, okay, you read what the book says. Now you're trying to imagine what it is. Right? Imagine, let's say the law of washing your hands in the morning. Okay, so you put it in a Negavasa cup and, in a cup, right? Let's say, should be by your bed, right? In a basin. Doesn't tell you how big the cup is, per se. Doesn't tell you what type of cup maybe, right? But if you see it, you see what this plastic cup looks like, then, seeing is believing. Right? So, give an example. Give a very, very simple example. Somebody learns how to swim. How do they learn how to swim? They did, no videos here. How do they learn how to swim? They read a book. Read a whole bunch of books about the dynamics of swimming. Very good. Now, what happens? Essentially, what happens is they get thrown, let's say, they dive in the deep end of a pool. Now, they've read a bunch of books about swimming. No videos. What's going to happen when they dive in the deep end of the pool? Or they're thrown in the deep end of the pool? They're drowned. Now, why are they going to drown? Because the book makes them look smart in a certain way. Going to make them look smart and understand what they're supposed to do. But while they're doing it, let's say they don't always remember. Let's say by the time they remember, like kick their feet, tread water, and all that, they're at the bottom of the pool. By the time they're at the bottom of the pool, right, it's game over, right? Most likely. But again, the person's going to say, so, what am I supposed to do? Right? Book knowledge is good. I'm not saying not. Book knowledge is good. But book knowledge, there are cases that, let's say, the book doesn't cover. Yeah, so then what do? You have a middle case. So you ask the question, okay, does this apply? Or doesn't it apply? Is it comparable? Or is not comparable? Yeah, now these things come up. Now a person's going to say, but how do I know? How do I know if it is or it isn't? Right? So Gemara makes a very clear statement. Gemara says, you cannot be doima milsa milsa. You cannot equate different things. Now, sometimes you're able to. Right? In other words, sometimes you can say, okay, this is similar. This is similar to this, so the law should be the same. Now, it could be, that will be the case. That the law will be the same. Could very well be. On the other hand, maybe not. Who says they're exactly similar? Could be. Again, so a person, today they go to Google, they go to ChatGPT, they ask them all these different questions, does it apply like this, apply like that, right, etc. So you may get the right answer, right? May get the right answer. Or you may not. But at the end of the day, someone who's learned for many years will know, or should know, are these cases the same? they will be able to know one way or another, either yes or no. Or if not, let's say they're not sure, so what do? So then you have to ask someone, are they the same? Can I compare them? Maybe you can, maybe not. Maybe there are, halachic ramifications according to Jewish law where you say you can't do that, or maybe you can, right? It depends. Depends on the situation. Not everything is comparable. Now, if the rabbis tell you it is comparable, very good. So then I can make the comparison because they know, right? They are in the know. We're not in the know, right? So you can say, but I have knowledge. Okay. But who says what you're going to say now is comparable? Maybe it is. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Right? So you got to be careful. Right? And a person should always ask if they're not sure. Maybe this is comparable. Right? I get questions like that all the time. And sometimes they're comparable. Right? Sometimes for sure they're comparable. Other times they don't have the same context. We don't look at it the same way. Right? Now it could be for any number of reasons. That's not even the point. Right? But the point is a person themselves without any knowledge, it doesn't mean the question's not valid. It may be valid. Could very well be a valid question. But if someone doesn't have knowledge or a certain level of knowledge, then what they say, they could, again, I'm not saying the question's not a valid question. I'm not saying they can't be right. They could be right. They very well could be right. Right? My experience is a lot of times they're not right. Why are they not right? Because they're lacking knowledge. That's not their fault. Right? But they're lacking knowledge. So they say, well, this should be comparable. Maybe. Or maybe not. Right? But, again, it has to be clarified. It can't be just said, well, I think this and whatever, based on, some say it's what my heart tells me. Yeah? We say in the Shema every day, you don't go stray after your heart. Rambam says that very clear. Right? The heart can be deceiving. Very deceiving. That applies equally to men and women. We don't make any distinction there. Right? So you don't go after what the heart says. It could be what the heart says is true. It could be. But many times the heart wants to lead the person astray. Right? Because as the statement goes, the eyes see, the heart covets. You can't necessarily go by what your heart says. And a lot of times, we say love is blind. Why is love blind? Because let's say there are a lot of factors, a lot of negative factors. Maybe a lot of red flags. What happens? Person's torn emotionally. So when a person's emotionally involved, many times what can happen is they don't see the bigger picture. And by not seeing the bigger picture, it can cost them seriously, down the line. Right? And let's say, there are people, unfortunately, because of, we'll call it lack of self-esteem, because that is probably one of the biggest problems today in general. People have lack of self-esteem. So because they have lack of self-esteem, they may have other people, quote unquote, build them up, but they're not good for them. And it's negative. Yeah. So they get blinded, right? That's the statement, love is blind, because you got to think, okay, your heart's telling you one thing. Your mind might say the same thing, but your mind might actually say, maybe this is a red flag. Maybe this is something that's not so good. Yeah. So in general, what would we say? But you need both. You need the mind and the heart. The Gemara in Kedushin says, person wants to marry somebody, they have to see them. They have to meet them. Right? They have to meet them. They have to speak with them. Person can't marry someone if they don't see them. And the most important thing is they have to be attracted. Right? So now, as Rav Noah Weinberg, blessed memory, founder of Torah and a few other yeshivas as well, but Torah actually stuck. No, Weinberg would say, what's the difference between love and infatuation? Love is something deep. There's a serious bond there, right? Based on a lot of different things. What's infatuation? You're going after your heart, right? But the bond is not there, right? There are other things. Okay, there are other things there, very good, but that's not the whole picture, right? That's not the whole picture, right? And a lot of times, infatuation will not lead to love. It may, but it may not. Because when a person's infatuated, they're not thinking with their mind, right? A lot of times they're thinking with their heart, right? Or maybe other bodily parts, yeah, we'll keep this clean. But their thinking in general is skewed. It's biased, right? And, sometimes the person has to be convinced. Sometimes there has to be interaction, right? Someone, or not interaction, but someone has to intervene. Someone may actually have to intervene. Now, it doesn't mean the person necessarily will listen. If the person has emotion involved, in general, logic a lot of times goes out the window, right? Because the person's heavily involved in emotion, but they don't see the other problems. Now, the other problems may be able to be worked out. Maybe they won't be able to be worked out. Yeah, so, obviously it depends. It's going to depend what it is. It's going to depend on what extent, right, and all that. But there are people who got themselves in bad situations. And why they get themselves in bad situations? Because their heart took them away. That's infatuation, right? Love comes later. That's why, according to Judaism, that there should be no physical contact before a person gets married. They date for however long. A few months later, let's say they agree to get married, 3 months, usually. Usually they get married. It's not going to be a long, drawn-out thing. By Hasidim, they draw it out longer because they don't meet as much in between. So that can be drawn out longer, but certainly by Ashkenazim, it's not going to be drawn out that longer, depending on time of the year, right, and what's going on. But in general, physicality always gets in the way. Usually always gets in the way. Right? Anyone ever watched in the 80s, back in the 80s, when Harry met Sally? That was the theme. Right? You can never be friends with the opposite sex. It always leads to more. Usually leads to more. Yeah, or one side wants more of it, the other side doesn't. I don't know. Whatever it may be. Whatever it may be. But don't platonic relationships there. Right? So that always gets in the way. Now, so when does love come? So let's understand. If two people, maybe come from similar backgrounds, usually similar background. Yeah, so they're already holding somewhere in the world. They already know what they're looking for, more or less. So it's not going to matter, where someone squeezes the toothpaste from. It's not going to matter, so many other things. Yeah, but that love, that bond, obviously is going to come later. It's an obvious question. People ask if you meet five times, 6 times, 8 times, whatever it is. How can you really know? You've never seen anyone, let's say, go through a trauma. You've never seen anyone go through through hardship, under pressure. Let's say, how do you know how the person's going to react? So what's the answer? You don't. Right? In general, you're going to be on your best behavior. They're going to be on their best behavior. So then, let's say they get married, have the first fight, first argument, whatever it is. They're going to say, well, this is not the person I married. It's not the person I want to spend necessarily the rest of my life with. But again, you can't come up with everything that's going to happen, and see everything in that context. It wasn't a story. It's a true story. It's a funny story. Never tell anyone to do it. But someone picks up a woman for a date. Yeah, so they start to drive. They're at a red light, and she takes the keys out of the car. Now, obviously, you can't go. Can't move. And the light turns green. Now, what happens when the light turns green? right? What happens? What happens when the light turns green? So what happens when the light turns green is he's like, can I have the keys? People are beeping. People are honking. And he's like, can I please have the keys? And she's not giving him the keys. Light turns red. People still beeping. People still upset. Yeah. People still upset. And what happens? What happens? The light turns green. And he says, can I please have the keys? People are beeping. So finally she gives him the keys. So a few minutes later, they're driving. Right? They're driving, and what happens? He asks her, like, why'd you do that? What was the purpose of that? That whole episode. So she said, well, I wanted to test you and see how you react under pressure. Because how do you find, unless something happens, how are you going to see the other person under pressure and how they're going to react? Right? Everyone's going to be in their best behavior. You're not going to see that. Right? Going to be impossible to see that. So a person, in theory, makes sense. Right? It makes sense. Test them. Right? Because you're not necessarily going to see them under pressure. So what does this woman say? This woman says, I want to test you to see how you react under pressure. So this woman tells him, I just want you to know you succeeded and you passed the test. This guy looks at her and is like, it was all a test? You did that to test me to see how I would react under pressure? She's like, don't worry about it, you passed. Like, you passed with flying colors. Right? She's giving him a compliment, a big compliment. He looked at her and said, you failed. He took her home. Right? Dropped her off at home and that's it. Right? The question is, how are you going to see someone under pressure? Now, sometimes it happens. There is pressure. Yeah? They say it's the best time of your life when a person's engaged, but there's pressure. There can be a lot of pressure in different ways. That's why they limit, how much contact you're going to have, before the wedding, because then you start over analyzing things. Oh, person said this. What do they really mean? Do they mean like this? Do they mean like that? It brings up all kinds of questions. Now, if they're legitimate red flags, okay. A lot of times, again, I'm not going to claim to be an expert here, but there are a lot of times that has nothing to do with anything except nerves. It's nerves. I mean, there are times you got to look into things, okay? There may be red flags. Very good. Yeah. But a lot of times it's nerves. It's a major decision. You're going to commit to live with this person the rest of their life and everything that goes with it. So you can't possibly know, how they're going to react to this, how's this going to happen, whatever. So what will people say? People say, so live together first. Right? What's the problem? Right? So there's no height, that wouldn't be an issue. Right? In other words, they can be considered married when they live together. They separate. It's kind of like divorce. Right? According to the Rambam. They don't have to go through anything formal to get married. Yeah, even if they wanted to get married. But what normally happens? So I just saw something today, which, right, not so surprising. Right? Divorce rate is over 60%. Well, 60%. Yeah. Now, there are a lot of reasons. A lot of reasons for divorce. Now, divorce, the Torah says, if two people don't get along, and there's no way to fix it, you get divorced. It's on the books. People say, oh, it's disregarded. It's looked down upon. There are plenty of people divorced today. In the Orthodox community, let's say it's 10%. Right? The divorce rate, it's climbing. It's not going to be close to what the percentage is in the secular world. But okay, it's climbing. Very good. Different reason. That's not really the point. Right? But what's the idea? You have a 60% divorce rate. 60%. If you live together, the percentage is higher. Significantly higher. So many years ago, and I can't imagine it's changed or gone down, it's over 70%, 75%. Something like that. What's the difference? Rav Victor Miller, a blessed memory, one of the Torah giants, the last generation, according to everybody, right? Victor Miller once said, "How do you kill a great romance?" He says, "Get married." What's the problem with getting married? In general, I get an obligation. I get something legal, right? If quote unquote, you're milking the cow for free, what's the problem, right? Won't be gross here. Yeah, for guys having a great time, the woman, well, she wants commitment. She wants commitment. So, therefore, what? Therefore, if they're living together, what changed? Person living together, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, decide to get married. Decide to get married after all these years. Okay, been together, let's say, I don't know, 10 years. Yeah, they decide to get married. Sometime later, they'll end up getting divorced. Now, what happened? What in the world happened over here? Nothing should have happened. They lived together for so many years because you don't have any commitment. There's zero commitment. You walk out anytime. Yeah. Either one can walk out at any time. What's the problem? Yeah, but when you have commitment, when you have an obligation, you have a piece of paper, makes it legal, that's different. Yeah, it could be, I'm saying. Could be. That's the reason. Right? That's the reason it's so high. Because now it's legal. Now you get more obligations. When you're living together, what are the obligations? No obligation. You can walk out. It's a famous story many, many years ago with famous actor John Hurt. Was married to somebody, or wasn't married, was actually living with somebody, had a few kids, and he left. So she wanted to claim half his money. She wanted to claim common law marriage. Now, in some places in the States, there is common law marriage. Right? There is common law marriage. 100% is common law marriage. Very good. In other states, not common law marriage. Okay, so what happened? She sued him for half his money. Now, I think in the end, she got something. She didn't get half. She didn't get half, but if they were considered, Noahites, then he walks out or she walks out, that's divorce. Right? The question is, if they're not married, it's not legal, according to where you live, then what do you get from it? In other words, how can a person claim, you owe me, I want half your money? You're not legally married. There's no legality here. Now again, according to the Torah, they're married. If they're living together for the sake of marriage, consider marriage. Well, does that give the person the right when they get divorced? Because it's not really legal, let's say, according to the state, that they should get half of what the other person has? You could say if they're married according to the Torah, why not? Okay, good. It's a good question. It's a good question. Yeah. So in some states in the U.S., there's common law marriage. In other places, it's not common law marriage. Common law marriage is what we call no-hide marriage. Right? Seemingly. In either case, people would say there has to be physicality. You have to live together. Or even if you're not living together, there has to be physicality. Why does there have to be physicality? How are you going to know what the other person is in that area? Right, let's say. Again, it's not really so complex, right? It's biology 101 or 101A. Right? That probably people will figure out. Right? Usually. I mean, sometimes it can be more of a problem, less of a problem, whatever. Right? So living together might be a bigger issue. Might be a bigger issue. But physicality in general brings a whole different thing into the arena here. What physicality does is now it's much more of an emotional thing. Why is it more emotional? Because now it's more intimate, right? When it becomes more intimate, yeah, there are other expectations. You can say, good, that's what marriage is. Okay. That's only one aspect of marriage. It's not the whole thing of marriage. What happens when you get older? Body doesn't react the same. Body, let's say better. Body doesn't look the same. Person had a child or two. Yeah, the body may not come back to what it originally was. Right? So, person marries, let's say, for the way the person looks, what's going to happen later? The person will dump that person, get someone younger. And the cycle will continue. Either way. Right? Usually it's the guy and the girl, they're not the other way around. Usually. But physicality is important, not going to say not. But again, it gets in the way. That's the point. Right? That is exactly the point. So love will come later. Right? And it'll be developed and it'll be nurtured and whatever. But before that, it gets in the way. Right? Physicality will get in the way. Right? So therefore, that's why the separation. Right? That's there is no physicality before you get married. So person said, but how do you know? The person's going to see skyrockets. The person gonna, a person, intuitively should know. Right? In other words, at some point you got to make a decision. You're not going to date forever. Right? You don't want to keep someone strung along either. Right? Usually after, let's say 5-6 dates, a person should know. Right? They should know. If not, okay, so go out longer. And sometimes the person will be afraid to pull the trigger. Why? Maybe they got burnt. Before, maybe it only goes to a certain point, and then, they feel they can't commit. There are dating coaches out there to help people. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying some of these things are not legitimate. They are. Sometimes it's just nerves. Sometimes, it can be other things, and they can help get the person over the hump, right? In order to get them, married. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it takes longer. Okay, but I'm not saying the process is perfect, per se, right? But statistically, whatever a person wants to say, statistically, this way of marriage and dating, or dating and marriage, would say better, is much more significant than it's much more, much more positive, and the divorce rate is much smaller, much smaller. Even if you tell me it's 10%, could be. Divorce rate, let's say, is close to 10% in the Orthodox community. Now, there are different reasons why that could be and why it's on the rise. Again, that's not the point. But what's the issue here? The issue is that you have a 9 out of 10 chance this person gets married in the Orthodox community and they will not get divorced. You got a 90% chance, let's say. In the secular world, you have a 6 out of 10% chance, 6 out of 10%, 6 out of 10 chance that you will get divorced. Yeah, that means you have a 60% chance that you get divorced. Probably higher in other places. Yeah. 6 out of 10 is bad. Right? Better not to be married. Right? It would make sense not to be married. Why? Because you end up getting divorced. At least once. Right? At least once. Someone was telling me a story recently. Father got married 3 times. Yeah, before he died. 3 times. Is that unheard of? Not unheard of. Certainly not unheard of, right? How common? I didn't check it to see what the stats are, but it makes sense. It makes sense if you don't have Torah values. If you don't have Torah values, then you're looking at the whole thing in the totally wrong way, right? Because if you look at the secular world, right, what's it all about? It's infatuation. Yeah, I'm not saying there are no values there. But what's the first thing? What's the first thing that happens in general? While I'm beating this topic down, what's the first thing that happens? Is infatuation. Person attracted to the other person. Right? There's attraction. Now, in the Orthodox world, there also has to be attraction. Because you have to live with that person. Right? You have to be physically attractive. That's not the only thing. Right? It's an important thing. I'm not going to say not, but it's not the only thing. Now, how do some people sometimes hook up together? right? It depends where they meet or how they meet. A lot of times, shouldn't say a lot, whatever I don't know what the stat is, so it doesn't really matter, but a lot of times things happen because they're under the influence, right? Usually with alcohol. I mean drugs per se, but when their inhibitions are lower, right? Not always, right? Not always. But, what's the person looking for? What do they want in a spouse? Now, again, people are going to be, quote unquote, girlfriend, boyfriend because of attraction. Usually. That's how it's going to start. But if that's the only thing that's really keeping them together, at least keeping one of them in the relationship, that relationship is doomed. And very simply, why is it doomed? Yeah, because there's nothing else keeping it together, right? There's zero keeping it together, right? If there's zero keeping it together except for attraction and nothing else in common, what's going to happen? What's the obvious thing is going to happen? They won't stay together, right? It's not possible, right? 100% not possible. Yeah, because they're only attracted to one thing. They're only attracted to the way the person looks. Or, a pace of Krona should be well. One say if you marry for money, he said you only lose interest. Person's attracted to money. Yeah. So he attracts someone who's got money. Very good. Or not so good. Yeah, it's also problematic. What happens if they lose money? They can't uphold the same lifestyle. Then the other person out the window. Other person says, yeah, it's been real. When you get money, call me. Like, they only want someone who's got money. That's it. It's also bad. Yeah, in other words, there's one specific thing you're looking at. Whether it's looks, whether it's money, could be both. It could be prestige. Or, forget about money. Marrying the quote-unquote a prestigious family. It's also something. Right? Not nothing. Really not nothing. But again, how long is that person going to stay with that person? If it's only based on that. Or if that's the main thing. Maybe there are other perks. Maybe they actually enjoy the company of the other person. Okay. A person can withstand a lot of things, but if they have other perks that that benefit them more, guess what's going to happen? So they'll stick it out. Why are they going to stick it out? Because the other way is worse. This is good. I got prestige, I got honor, I got other things, maybe money to boot. Okay. Is the person do I really want to be with? Is it really so exciting? Do we bond? Do we this? Other things annoy me? Whatever. Okay. But what's going to happen? Maybe for the most part, they'll stick it out because these other factors are more important, right? But, in a Jewish marriage, what's the most important thing? Values. Not just what do you bring to the table. That's part of it. And what your character traits are, and what your goals are, and who you want to be. But they're all based on the same thing, right? They're all based on religious values. That's the base. That is the most important thing. Now, if you're both, let's say, holding the same level, more or less, religiously, very good. Now you have to see if the personalities, if there's a personality clash or not. And let's say you get along personality-wise, very good. And what if to boot, you're also attracted to the other person, also good, right? That is important. It's not a small thing here, right? But again, they have to bond. They have to have things in common. People say opposites attract. Not in this case. Right? In other words, they're going to be coming more or less from the same place. Right? Some people a little bit more religious, less religious, but at the end of the day, they see themselves growing together going in the same direction. If you see someone isn't religious and the other person is religious, that'll never go. No matter how much they convince themselves, the other person's not going to change. Let's say. Right? We're not going to say, oh, we hope they change and let's see how it goes. It's not going to work. One person keeps Shabbos, the other one doesn't. Or the other one's not interested. So what's going to happen? You have kids, how are you going to raise them? You're not going to go into such a situation. You want to be in a situation, both are on the same playing field. Both are going to be in the same way, more or less. Let's say 100%, right? Maybe one of them is more stringent in some ways. Maybe, someone's less stringent in other ways. But in general, they're holding the same. They're going to keep the holidays, right? The festivals. They're going to keep Shabbos. They're going to work on not speaking Lashon Hara. They're going to send the kids to Jewish schools. Okay, they have to discuss, what type of schools and where they're going to go and how you see this and how you see that. Okay, right? But you should know at least some of that before they get married, even if they're much younger. Where do they see them the next 5 years? Next 10 years? Yeah, they have kids. What schools would you like them to, to go to, right? You have this discussion even before you have kids because you want to make sure you're on the same page, right? In general, right? But another thing is that they have to be compatible. Compatible, again, we're not talking intimate-wise. That's another issue. What compatible over here means they feel comfortable in each other's presence. Yeah, in other words, they feel like they can talk forever. Right? So, when I met my wife, many years ago. So, we had these dates, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. And we had, many, many things in common. Many, many things, in common, et cetera. More or less going in the right direction. That was it. 2 weeks we got engaged, which wasn't, she was still in university or whatever, but, wasn't part of the norm. One of our friends freaked out because it's only 20. And so, so we said, this is like playing up, playing grown up, but for real. And some of them sort of understood it. Others, thought 20 years old, crazy, you don't have a degree. What are you going to do? This, that, right? Didn't make any, a lot of people didn't make any sense, but 32 years later, thank God, almost 33 years later, still one piece, family still together, thank God. But there was a lot in common, tremendous amount in common. Now, I would say we're on this, I met, tell you a little history. So I met my wife in Sfas. She was up there, up north, was right after Sukkot. I went up with friends of mine, and the whole story how she got up there, and she wasn't really supposed to be there, and she actually wasn't really supposed to be in Israel, during that time. But either way, we ended up meeting. We had a 3.5 hour conversation on the way back on the bus. Now, as the story goes, this is kind of an unorthodox way of doing it, but as the story goes, whatever, we sat next to each other. That was, so she'll say, I forced her to do it. Okay. But, I had the right idea anyway. So anyway, 3.5 hours later, after all the discussion where we grew up and this and that and whatever, by the time we got to Jerusalem, I was already convinced. I was already convinced this is the right one. Yeah. So anyway, whatever. Dated for a couple of weeks, went back, to the States before Thanksgiving, announced our engagement. People thought we were absolutely out of our minds. They got married 6 months later, in Israel and whatever. Rest is history. Now, again, a little bit unorthodox, but at the same time, the base was the same. Similar backgrounds, wanted to go in the same direction, right? In spiritual terms. Even though she wasn't necessarily holding where I was holding at that time. And as she said, you're taking a big risk, which was true, right, to a certain extent. But, I saw the bigger picture, or tried to see the bigger picture. And that's what happened, right? That's actually what happened. Now, again, what's it all based on, right? Yeah, it was based on attraction. Yeah, but it was based on other values. The other values are where do you see yourself going in 10 years? Where, it's already going in that direction. I already made my choices before. We changed a lot during that time also, right? Instead of being, religious Zionists and more Orthodox, became ultra-Orthodox. That's where we stayed and whatever. But whatever, it took time, right? It took time to adjust and all that. Very good. But what's the point? But the point is the values were the same. Well, the values were similar. Similar to the extent where, I had no question. Maybe I should have questioned certain things, but I didn't have too many questions. Yeah. So that bond is only going to get stronger later, but you have to have the things in common, right? If you don't have the things in common, one person's coming out of left field, the other person's going in a different direction. it's not going to go. Why? Because you don't have the same values. The values are different, right? But again, there are a number of components here. Well, I'm just on this topic. There are a number of components. What's one component? Attraction, right? For sure, there has to be attraction. What's the second? Important thing is how you relate to each other, right? You have things in common, right? Not only you have things in common, but you get along, right? In other words, you can find endless things to talk about. Yeah. So what's the question people have when they date? In general, they go out. What are we going to talk about? What do you do when there's a lull in the conversation? Right? It's a common thing people say, like, okay, first date is just like getting to know each other a little bit. Second date, start asking more, in-depth questions if it's, if it gets there. Then whenever you go out, you do different things. You see the other person in different situations, whatever it may be, okay. Right. But again, a lot of things from the very beginning are already going to be set, right? The main things are which direction you want to go in life. That's the main thing that's going to be set. Okay. You have to get along. There has to be attraction, right? That, do the two people melt together, right? It's an important thing. It's not a small thing, right? It's definitely an important thing. That there's no question. At the same time, love will come later, right? Because again, as we said, physicality, will get in the way. But with all that, when you have so much in common, or you should have enough in common, yeah, so that's already, it doesn't mean certain things can't change. And perspectives can change. They can change. Maybe some people becomes more religious, the other person becomes less religious, right? Or, a lot of things can change. But usually, the base should be the same. Should be coming from similar backgrounds, right? So, use myself as an example. We dated 2.5 weeks. We didn't have one problem conversation. Yeah, not one problem. So you say, okay, you're the big talker, which is true, but nonetheless, we say what happens if there's a lull in the conversation. It's awkward. It's like, all right, now what? Like, what are you talking about now? Which direction are we going now? Right? So that, thank God, never had that problem. But if two people meet in general, again, doesn't mean skyrocket's going to go off. But if two people meet and you feel like you click, that's a good sign. Doesn't mean it's going to stay that way and further end up marrying them. Maybe yes, maybe no. Right? But that's an important factor. It's a major factor. Right? Are you compatible? Conversation-wise. Do you feel like, you're waiting to hear from that person? Do you feel, you're missing not speaking to them? You're missing being around them? Yeah, I know in some cases it can be overkill a little bit, but at the same time, if a person feels blasé about seeing the other person, they can see them, they cannot see them. Yeah, that's a problem, right? That would be a major red flag, because if you're not excited to see the person, then what's the point, right? Because the whole point of dating is for what purpose? For marriage. That is the purpose. So a person has to remember. I mean, it's a big decision, and you're gonna be living with this person hopefully for the rest of your life. So if a person has doubts, a person has doubts, well, I don't really get so excited when I hear from them. And, it could be nerves. Right? But if this is the person you're going to spend the rest of your life with, person has to think, well, isn't it kind of important that, you have these heart palpitations, you don't hear from them. It can only be for a few hours or a day or whatever, but you're looking forward to seeing them. You're looking forward to speaking to them, so to speak. Right? Now, if a person doesn't feel that, then you have to reevaluate. But at some point within this process, we said by like the fifth or sixth date already, and they've probably done different things during different dates. I would say by the sixth date, yeah, they should know. They should know if this is the right person. Now, sometimes say, I need a little more time. Okay. So you go to 8 days. You could go to 10 days, but it shouldn't schlep much more than that, right? Because, no matter where you go or what you do, how is that going to solidify the decision you make? In other words, all the cards are on the table. Yes. You know exactly what the other person said. You know exactly where they've been. You are attracted to them or whatever. Yeah. You do feel compatible. But what's stopping you? What's stopping someone from pulling the trigger? Again, it could be nerves. And one of my kids, it was nerves. But, told her that, we knew the other family. Shouldn't just marry for that. It was a good family, whatever. I had her speak to someone, and person said, like, you don't have any questions. It's nerves. It's normal to be nervous. This person is, and is nervous by nature, in many things. Okay. So this is a big decision. I'm not gonna say it's not a big decision. But there were no red flags. There were 0 red flags. There's no reason not to go further. Right? It wasn't a great question necessarily not being sure. It was nerves. This was a case of nerves. No red flags, no nothing. Yeah. 2 days later they got engaged. Like, been married, happily married ever since. Yeah. 8 years of marriage, like 4 kids, thank God, a lot of, rambunctious boys. A lot of fun when they're around. In either case, again, if it's a major red flag, good. You got to investigate. You got to, speak out issues. If it's not a major red flag, what's stopping a person? Right? What's stopping them? Right? Like my wife said to me, like, how do you know? I said, this is something I have no doubt. I have no doubt. I said, okay. So I laid the cards on the table. So tell me what your doubts are. Tell me where the doubts are. We'll discuss them. She had no, she didn't have any doubts, and that was it. Right? But again, a person, could second guess and say maybe it's this, maybe that, maybe the other thing. Right? But again, a person cannot, the point is you cannot get caught up in infatuation. Right? The love is going to come later. It for sure is going to come later. Now, in the secular world, people say that's absolutely nuts. That's absolutely nuts. You need physicality, you need intimacy, right? How are you ever going to know how the other person is? I think people figure it out. Yeah, well, keep this clean. Yeah, I think people like that part they can figure out. Now, it could be there are issues there. Could be. Could be there's some issues there. Okay. But in general, right? It's a major change, by the way, where you don't touch the person, right? You've never been, physical with anybody, and all of a sudden, almost everything becomes permissible at that point. After the marriage. Yeah, give or take. That's a major change. The major change. Okay, so that takes time to get used to. But again, it's like anything else. You have to nurture it. And you have to work with it. And if things are problems, okay. So you go discuss it with somebody. If there are issues. And issues can come up. For sure, issues can come up. Right? And many different things. Again, you remember, a person's dating, they're on their best behavior. What happens? One of them comes home and they're in a bad mood. And all of a sudden they think, oh, the world's over. Why are they walking around like that? Why, this, guy, unless he grew up with, sisters. That time of the month, women can be irritable. They'll feel good. They're hormone. They don't want to be near anybody. Let's say, 5 girls. So used to it. In different ways. But, a guy, if he didn't grow up like that, whatever, so he's going to be taken aback. Now, it's not necessarily a personal thing. It doesn't feel good. Doesn't want to be around anyone, and, especially him. Like, it's a normal thing, right? Okay, you can't totally ignore him, and, she has to learn how to deal with that. Okay. Yeah, but he also has to learn deal with that. So, heard a great Rosh Shiva once say, when I was counseling guys before they get married, he said you have to know there are three types of women. Three types of women, right? One is how you interact. When you can't touch her physically because she got a period, let's say 2 weeks out of the month, let's say something like that. That's one type of woman. Second type of woman is when she's pregnant, right? Then hormones going crazy, other things. Third type of woman is after she gives birth, right? Goes to giving birth and afterwards, right? And dealing with, I'm not even talking about postpartum depression, all that, just having child, going through the birth process, and starting to raise kids. So he says there are three types of women, but a guy has to know like how to deal with each stage. Not so easy. Like I say, it's so easy. You deal with the same person in different ways, right? In different ways, and not only that, one of the reasons, the main reason I think, is that a Jewish marriage will be stronger, religious marriage will be stronger, right? Is because men don't want to hear this, but women will be all excited about this, and that is, when she gets a period, you can't be physical. You can't handle anything. You can't, certain things you can't do, right? Any type of touching or any of these type of things can't be done. So a person has to deal with their spouse in a way that's not physical. Now, obviously, someone's in pain or someone's sad, want to give them a hug, you can't. Right? That is totally forbidden. 100% forbidden. If she has a period, that's it. If she hasn't gone to the mikveh, you can't do that. So a person has to look at their spouse in a different way. You have to speak to them in a way, not just in a physical way, or act in a physical way. So for God, that might be, harder to do, in different ways. For a woman, she's like, get away from me. But when she goes to the mikveh after, let's say 2 weeks later, again, it's like a renewal. It's like, it's like having, your second honeymoon. But again, that just shows you can't be together all the time, even when she's permissible, right? Because, if a person's only doing that all the time, then, he treats his wife like an object, or she treats him like an object, and go both ways, right? Can sure go both ways. But even in such a case, person has to know how to talk to their wife, right? No matter what situation they're in, whether they're permissible or not. When they're not permissible, it's harder, right? But a person has to learn those dynamics. Okay, right? But again, this is the reason. I think it's the main reason. First of all, because your values are the same. Second of all, you're not objectifying the spouse in in either way. Now, again, I'm not saying in the secular world you're not going to have marriages that aren't going to work. You have people that get married, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and, the marriage is still going strong, okay. Right? But the values of that, that's rare. My parents' generation was, you would see that, there were people who got divorced, not going to say, not going to say not, but they had certain values of staying married, even if it was hard. Again, I'm not talking about abusive marriages and other things, right? But in general, push came to shove, you work on it. Or you just say, okay, this person has this. It's not great, but there are other important things that you're going to stay married. Today, people don't want to work on anything. People change their spouse like they change their shirts. They don't want to work. Now, we said before, the Torah says, if the marriage is bad, you can get divorced. You're right, but a rabbinical court is not going to let a person get divorced necessarily, right? If they've gone through therapy, the therapist says, there's no way this can be salvaged. Okay, right? Or there's a mental illness, other things can happen. It says there's no way to salvage. You get divorced, right? It's the last resort. But it's on the books. If it can't be fixed, it can't be fixed, right? A person wants to work on it, and they want to, go for therapy, and they want to, okay, right? That's what should be done if possible, right? And what if one person doesn't want to go to therapy? But they're the ones that really need the most therapy, let's say. They refuse to go to therapy, so what do? So that other spouse can make a choice. They can either go for therapy themselves, how they're going to deal with themselves in this situation. The other person will never change. Right? right? Or they may just say, I don't want to deal with this. Yeah, they may end up getting divorced. Yeah, because the other person won't change. Now, let's just say, well, we'll look at it a little bit deeper. Let's just say this one is their bashert. This is the one they were supposed to marry. Very good, right? This is the one they were supposed to marry. Okay. Now, as Gemara says, where, a person in general is half a soul. When they meet the right person, yeah, they become one soul together. Very good. So I can talk about intermarriage, and a person marries the wrong person and what's going to happen with their soul and what the children they're supposed to bring out. Okay, that gets a lot more complicated, right? But over here, you met the right person, right? Let's say you met the right person. Now both souls come together. Beautiful. Both souls come together. Now, is that a guarantee the marriage is going to work out? No. But you're going to tell me God put these two souls together for a purpose. Yes. That's very true. Yeah. Can that marriage, though, not work? Can they end up getting divorced? They could. So what happened? God put them together. The Gemara says, what's God busy doing? Making matches. And each match, how a person met their spouse and whatever, it's absolutely miraculous, right? In many ways. Usually, I've told the story before, usually when any of my kids get married, so usually in Shabbos, they have these special, you have Sheva brachos for 7 days, right? For 7 days, you have these festive meals for the married couple. So usually in Shabbos, when I speak, I usually tell the story, how they met and what all the divine providence is, what all the hashgacha pratis is, because it's always divine providence. People say, a person wants to be an atheist. Yeah, let's say, you got 400 million atheists out there. Okay. They say, you don't see God in this world, right? Forget about creation, forget about nature, forget about the human body, right? They say, there's no such thing, right? There's no such thing, right? As God, divine providence. Right? Amalek, we just came through Purim, still going through Purim with the Ren, trying to beat them into a pulp. But in either case, right? In either case, what was Haman? Haman came out of Amalek. What does Amalek believe in? They don't believe in supernatural, right? That ended up getting Haman killed in the end. But we're saying that you can see the supernatural, the divine, and divine providence by how people end up getting married, right? Certainly in the ultra-Orthodox community, there's nothing to talk about. There's nothing to talk about, right? I have 3 cases. 3 cases, of my kids. 2 I knew, 3 I knew the other side, right? One of them, my daughter mentioned before, I knew the other side for 25 years, because the person who made the match was my son-in-law's aunt, who my wife's very close to, and we're very close to that family, and we know the whole family on both sides since I've been married, for the last 30 years. And the other side came to we made the Chaim, just the family. So he said, how do you know my family again? I'm like, what, are you kidding? Yeah, I knew his brother very well. He used to learn with his brother. We used to go there for Purim, whatever. And the funny part was the son-in-law of mine was learning the yeshiva where I pray every Shabbos. I just happen to know his last name, because a lot of people don't know by their last name, and I saw him at a wedding. I used to sit next to him. Yeah, I had no idea who he was. I used to sit next to him. And I was at this wedding. And I asked him, I said, what are you doing here? Because his cousin got married. So his uncle's son got married, so makes it his cousin. Right? We'll make it simple here. And I know them for whatever, since I was married. So he goes, I'm related. I'm like, what are you talking about? So he told me his last name. I'm like, you're related? And so he asked me, he's like, what are you doing here? I said, well, I know the groom before you were born. Yeah, so I know the whole family. Yeah, so you always say, gotta be careful who you sit next to, right? You never know, that person could end up becoming your son-in-law, right? That was one story, right? That was one story. Second story was my next daughter. My next daughter ended up marrying somebody that my oldest daughter works with girls girls that are struggling, whatever. So she has like a lot of groups around Jerusalem and also where I live. And she gets these people to speak. And the person that would spoke there a lot was somebody that was teaching at that time at Asia Torah, doing outreach or whatever. And one time before everyone came, he said, "Well, maybe someone, for my son." So my daughter said, tell me about your son. And it's telling him this, that, and the other things. I got the perfect person. He goes, my sister. So whatever. We checked out the other family. We knew the other family, whatever. So, they went out, got married. Now the third one got married like 4 years ago, I guess 3-4 years ago. So we knew the other side, and she was very close to someone she went to elementary school with, and anyway, they went for a walk around where I live, and so she just started, dating process, and so this girl, asked her, it's like, well, what about my brother? One of my brothers, yeah. And also, dating on. It's like, well, what about him? So the family we knew, right? The family, whatever, I knew very well. And whatever, they went out and, and that's it. They, married, 4 years, very happy. And, it's very funny because, by those Chaims, that we had, in my house, I knew everybody there, which is like not so common, right? Not necessarily so common. We had a lot of people in common that we knew, but we knew each other. It wasn't like we didn't know each other. Right, because years ago he used to sit right behind me, when I pray, and he's like, "Come on, don't you have any girls from any of my sons?" So we found one. We found one that worked out. But again, these are three stories, three different families, very similar, I guess, to our families in many ways. Right, three different families. Divine providence is uncanny. Yeah, it's not something you can even make up. You know, and the irony was, I'll just tell you one other ironic part, that my last two kids that got married, both families live one building away from each other, down the street. Like it's also, like what are the odds? What are the odds of that? It's also pretty slim, right? It's also pretty slim. So, but everybody has stories. Everybody, yeah. How the divine providence works when two people are going to meet in order to get married. Again, a person can date many, many different people and end up not getting married until they meet the right one, right? I know someone who dated 20 people, 25 people, right? Until they finally met, the right one. Okay. Three of my kids were the first one. Yeah. So, I'll be thankful for that. I know somebody's got three kids and can't marry them, can't get them married off, good family, whatever, just can't find, I don't know, different, I have no idea what the issue is. Yeah, so I'll take other problems over that, having kids at home until like they're 25, 26 or older, whatever. So like, in the Orthodox community, that's quote unquote old, so to speak. Right. But again, what does that show beyond the shadow of a doubt? It's divine providence. No question. Now, could any marriage, even if they're destined to be married, even if they come from, one soul with another soul and putting them together as one soul, yeah? Could it not work out? Could not work out. Why did God put them together? Because he wanted them together. He wanted certain children to come out of them. Okay, or not, or whatever the case is. Right? But, I spoke at a Shev Brochus once, one of these festive meals, I told, in front of a whole crowd, so they invited me to not only to come, because I was friendly with one of the sides, and they said, we want you to speak. So anyway, I got up to speak, and one of the things I said was, marriage is like a flower, right? If you take a flower, you don't put it in dirt and you don't water it, guess what? It's gonna die, right? If it doesn't get the nutrition, it doesn't get the whatever, it doesn't get the sunlight, it doesn't get enough water, it will die, right? This is exactly what will happen. It'll die. Right? So they, probably they were humoring me and said, wow, that's so profound. And it's like, this is how it is. A person can be married 20 years, 15 years, 10 years, whatever. If you don't work on the marriage, they'll die. Essentially, you're just married out of convenience. Right? So yeah, you got to take time out. You got to, speak about other things, not just, what's going on with your kids. And, you got to make time. Because if you don't make time, If you don't make time, what's going to happen? He'll die. Because then you lose things in common, right? Which can happen. Not only that, person go through a trauma. No one knows how a person's going to react from a trauma. You go through a trauma. Yeah, illness, financial upheaval. That can destroy a marriage. A lot of times, marriages do not go down the toilet if financially a person was stronger. Yeah. If they were more stable, let's say better, right? If they were more stable, right? What financial upheaval can do, and a lot of marriages suffer because of this, because there's no stability. Yeah, when more problems come out when there's financial pressure. Now, it doesn't mean the problems can't come out if they're not financial pressure, but when you're under pressure and you're under the gun, then other things come to the forefront that wouldn't necessarily come to the forefront as much. But now you're feeling the pressure of what? Of money, right? Of finance, right? So that makes things worse. That makes things worse. So it's probably, I would say, within the top 3 things that can ruin a marriage, potentially ruin a marriage, make things worse, much worse. Right? Why? Because again, if a person is making enough money, yeah, one spouse, even if they don't feel they're getting everything they need per se, since they're financially stable, they have other outlets, right? Let's say they can go with their friends, they can do other things. Yeah, so they don't have to focus on that, right? But if they can't do that, and if financially strapped, and even if it's the other person's fault or whatever, okay, well, that makes things a lot worse. Why does it make it worse? Because then other things come to the forefront that wouldn't necessarily come to the forefront, right? They would be kind of buried, or maybe bother them, maybe, I don't know, maybe a person would have to go through therapy for certain things, right? But they wouldn't get divorced necessarily because of it. But money, when a person is financially stable, if they are financially stable, then these other things, okay, I'm not saying they're not going to matter. They probably will matter, right? In a certain way. It depends, depends what it is. But if a person has other outlets, so they can deal with it easier. If they don't have those outlets, and these things really bother them, then what that does is it makes it worse, right? It makes, it makes it significantly, worse. So a person, this is what happens. Yeah. So again, I'm not going to say 100% that's the only problem. Yeah, but financially, I think, is an issue that brings other things to the forefront that wouldn't necessarily come out, right? They wouldn't necessarily come out. But the fact is, now they're struggling on that level also, because they're struggling on that level, so it brings out other things. Certainly brings out other things. But again, if a person would be financially more stable, guess what? Things wouldn't bother them as much. Probably wouldn't bother them. I mean, I'm not going to say it's never going to bother them, right? Obviously, depending what it is, right? But, if it can be worked out, great. But when a person's on a financial strain and these other things are going on, it makes it worse, right? That's the point is, it makes it worse. Now, again, some things you're not in control of. You're just not in control of. One day, you could be a multimillionaire. Next day, you have nothing. Overnight. So your life changes like dramatically. Yeah. Now, person could fall into depression. Person could, do all kinds of things, and like that relationship can deteriorate because, of hardship. It could be, a medical hardship. A person goes through, a serious illness. I know of a story of somebody that, I don't know, I've been married. Gosh, I've been married that long, maybe a couple of years. And this guy's spouse, a major car accident, like major car accident, and we're on the road to recovery. Definitely, I think on the road to recovery, but it's been a slow process. A very slow process. They thought originally she's never going to be able to walk again. I mean, like serious, like, serious injuries, but, thank God not to the mind, even though, She had a head injury, whatever, but it didn't affect her, it didn't affect her mind, but whatever, there are other issues. Other issues. Now, this happens at the beginning of a marriage. This is like within the first year, I think within the first year of marriage. A major thing. She's all like 21, let's say, 20, 21, right? And this guy's like, whatever, 24. You don't expect something like that to happen. Or, I know somebody that's, I don't know how they dealt with this, but the first child, the Down syndrome, first child. There are people that have fertility issues. There are people that have other, I know someone that's, I mean, can't imagine, he buried his daughter. She got cancer, like 25, 26, something like that, or maybe 28, less than 30 for sure. Less than 30 for sure, two little kids. It was last year, I think. Last year, so I went to whatever. I went to the Mortar's house and whatever. She got cancer. Guy gets married. Happily married, two kids, and now his wife dies like a year later. I think like 3, 4 years later. Let's say it's a major thing. Now, I'm not saying someone necessarily has to die. There could be anything that can happen, right? Anything. But that's you could ask the question: if God put them together, and they had two kids or whatever, well, all of a sudden you get the whole life in front of you, and now she gets cancer, or he gets cancer, or whatever, and they end up dying. And there are tragic stories like that, So, nobody knows day in and day out, what's going to be, right? But at the end of the day, as we said, there are a lot of factors going to make a strong marriage, but you have to work. You have to work at it. And people say, oh, no one in the other Orthodox community gets divorced. It's not true. It's looked down upon. Not anymore. Certainly not. Right? I think people get divorced too easily today, but, in general, and they're getting divorced much younger. And you can have people getting divorced midlife crisis. Because now all the kids are out of the house. So that was the main thing they had in common. Yeah, it was their kids. And now they're together. Well, over the years, they didn't work on it. So then it becomes painful now. It becomes very hard because, okay, you see your kids, speak to them about there's no one in the house now. Right? So what are you talking about? Or what if what was a priority to you is still a priority to you, but not necessarily to the other person? Right? And that defines who you are. It's also a problem. Right? These things, have to be worked out somehow. Right? I'm not gonna say it's easy. Marriage is not easy by any stretch. Right? And today's challenge is much different. What other people went through, back in the day. But within the outer Orthodox communities, no question, marriage is an institution that is successful, extremely successful. I mean, even whatever's going on today, it's still very successful. Yeah, probably more successful than any other system out there. But at the same time, can a person end up getting divorced? Yeah. Does it take work? It takes work. Or have a kid that struggles. Yeah. Struggles in school or struggles with other things. Also, right? Even if you have money, but you have that. Right? There are many things that can happen. Many, many things that can happen. Yeah, that can take its toll on a marriage. Yeah, but what's the most important thing? The most important thing is that both have to be on the same side, going in the right direction. And whatever difficulty comes, they have to work on it as a team. Now, what happens? One feels, the other spouse is the fault, and they caused it, and this and that. So there are a lot of things. There are a lot of potential things that can happen. They're not good, right? That can take a strain, on the marriage. At the same time, if you're in it for the long haul, you got to work these things out somehow, right? Even if it means you have to go to therapy, right? They have to be worked out, because if they don't get worked out, over time it just gets worse, right? Over time, it definitely gets worse. So again, it's not just about the physicality here, right? The person has to find the time and make the time, for their spouse. That's what they have to do. If you don't make that time, you're going on autopilot, it won't be so great, right? And the person will struggle with that. So it has to be worked at. All right, let me take some questions here. Someone says, person suffers injury, let's say requiring ice and elevation. Shabbos comes, tells the person is ice and injury permissible. Yes. You can take ice. Well, what's the issue? The issue is if I take ice, the ice is going to melt. I can't take ice and just, right? In one instance, I can't take ice. Let's say it's a very hot day. Or even if it's not a hot day, it doesn't matter. I put ice in a cup. Now, if I'm putting water in the cup with the ice to make the ice cold, right? That's how you make the water cold if it's not cold water. Yeah. Someone's gonna say you can't do that. Why? Because it's gonna melt. You're right. Inevitably the ice is gonna melt, but that's okay. If I put ice in a cup in general, and the whole purpose, and I'm not using it for water. Yeah, I'm not gonna use it to drink. If a person's gonna eat the ice, there are people who like to chew on ice. Okay. You can do that. But if the purpose is just to leave it there, right, then that's a problem. Right? Then that would be forbidden. That would be forbidden. So in this case, even though the ice will melt, but that is the way. Let's say a person banged their leg. Yeah, bang their knee, start to swell. Yeah, so what's the remedy? What's the remedy? Put ice on it. Okay, put an ice pack on it. Okay. Or ice. Let's say you put ice. Forget an ice pack. Put ice on it. The ice is going to melt at some point, but let's say that is the remedy. You can do that. You can do that on Shabbos. Yeah, do it a different way than you normally do, but you could do that. Yeah, so icing you could do. Right? Icing seemingly you should be able to do. Let me just check something here. Even though it's gonna melt, yeah, it should be all right. I don't see why. Um, one second. I'll put ice pack. Yeah. Even though a mild discomfort, maybe not. If it's what about a heat pack? An interesting question. It doesn't generate heat until it's opened. So you open the heat pack, let's say, make it functional, that'd be forbidden. So a non-Jew could do it. Non-Jew could open it. That wouldn't be a problem. But for a Jew to do it would be a problem. Yeah, so an ice pack, again, it would be a major thing you could. Right? If it's only mild discomfort, let's say. Yeah. If it's a mild discomfort, then you shouldn't do it. Right? Because it's done for medical purposes. If it's not, if it's something more serious, you could. Right? You definitely could. So it depends. Right? It depends. If it's something major, I could. If it's something minor, you probably shouldn't. You can do it a different way. But a heat pack's a different thing because you have to open it. Right? That's how you do it. That's how you use it. So therefore you have to what do you call it? You have to just get non-Jew do it. All right. Somebody asks, spend one whole year with them or to see how they react during the mention. Yeah, a year's a long time. A year's a long time. Certainly in the outdoor Orthodox community, you're not going to wait a year. Right now, it could be. By Hasidim, it's a little bit different. By Hasidim, they may meet a few times, end up getting married. But the engagement period could be 6 months. Right? Could be 6 months, but they don't get together that much. They don't even speak that much. They're not going to really speak that much. So doing it over a year is going to be very hard. It's going to be very hard. Yeah. So you don't need to see how they go through the festivals. Even within 3 month period, if you have a festival come up, very good. So you can see what they do or what the family does. A person goes there for Shabbos, whatever. Okay. You see how the family dynamics are. You see how they go through Shabbos. Maybe get together on a festival. If a festival comes up, okay. A year? No, definitely not. That's too long. Too long. Right? Again, the average time, depending on the time of the year, right? In the outdoor Orthodox community, if they get engaged, right? They're not Hasidic, let's say. They get engaged usually 3 months. 3 months. It can be done in 2 months, but that's a bit of a strain. Not just financially, even if you have the money, but it's just getting everything done, getting gowns and matching gowns if you have girls and whatever. Like it's a stretch. It can't, I'm not saying it can't be done. It can be done, but it's a stretch. Yeah, 3 months is like enough time to usually to get everything together. Um, in general. So somebody asks, okay, if one half is predestined from heaven prior to one's birth, does the person have to be afraid he can miss their beshert? If you don't play your hands right. um, I'll put it to you like this. What if God is busy making these matches every day? Yeah, so he knows who's out there. He knows who's going to be destined, one for the other, right? Now, what can happen? I didn't mention this, but I'll mention it now. Now they brought it up. And that is one book I read, or I didn't get past the introduction. I mentioned the story before. There's a book by, I think, Ravari Kaplan called Made in Heaven. It's a book about marriage. And I didn't get past the introduction. Why? Because he says, you're getting married. It doesn't just affect you. It affects your spouse, it affects your kids, it affects your grandkids. I'm like, who, me? I shut the book. Right? I didn't get past the introduction. Now I'll put this in perspective. Right? Talk about, let's say you married the wrong person. What happens? What happens if a Jew marries a non-Jew? And that non-Jew's not going to convert. Right? Let's say. What happens over here? Now you married the wrong person. Jew's not supposed to marry a non-Jew, right? According to everybody. According to everybody, Torah makes that very clear. Jew not allowed to marry a non-Jew. Okay. If a Jew's not allowed to marry a non-Jew, what happened to the other half of that soul? What happened to that other half of the Jewish soul? Right? And the kids that they were supposed to have. So now God has to go to plan B, or C, or F, or Z, or Z, right? Depending where you are. Right? He has to go to a different plan now. Why? Because those kids aren't supposed to, those souls are not going to come out. So how's God going to bring out those souls if the person married the wrong person? Right? Now, that's just if one person intermarries. What's the intermarriage today? Over 50%. Some places over 60%, some places even higher. So you imagine now how God has to orchestrate everything. If let's say 6 out of 10 people marry the wrong person. What happened to all those souls? Sounds like the Matrix. What happened to all those souls that are supposed to come out? I have a big problem. Because now your half the soul is vanished, gone somewhere else. What about those kids you're supposed to have with that other soul? So God has to arrange it a different way. You're going to need major supercomputers over here to do this. Right? Now, again, if you're talking one person marries the wrong person, right? Let's say marries a non-Jew. So now God has to orchestrate how that soul is going to work itself out to get into the world if these two people are not married. Yeah. Well, what if in general you marry the wrong person? Yeah, okay. So let's say a person did not marry their bashir for whatever reason. Now, I'm not saying a non-Jew, right? Let's say 2 Jews married, but it's not the right person. Maybe it's not the right person. Yeah. So the same thing. In other words, that half soul they were supposed to be married to, yeah, is somewhere else. If that half soul is somewhere else, it's the same thing as if they married a non-Jew in different ways. Yeah, it's a similar thing. Right? So does the person have to worry? They have to worry. Maybe they didn't marry the right person. I don't know. I don't think a person has to worry about that. Because if you're doing it for the sake of heaven, you're marrying the person for the right reason. There's no reason to think that they're not the right person. Now, if a person married somebody, let's say, and there were so many red flags, but they got married anyway. Now, doesn't God know what a person's going to do? He knows what they're going to do. Right? So let's say shortly thereafter they get divorced. Let's say the person can't take it, there's abuse, whatever. They're not staying married. Yeah, so what happened now? If they married the wrong person, can happen. Yeah, well, they have kids, they don't have kids. So you have the same problem. You have the same problem. The person doesn't have to worry. They meet someone and they want to marry them, that they're the wrong person. No, don't have to worry about that. Right? Now, I would say, if a person would be more worried if they marry somebody, let's say, a Jew, let's say, marries a non-Jew, and that non-Jew doesn't want to convert. Obviously, that person's not necessarily going to care, right? That Jew's not necessarily going to care. If he marries a non-Jew, maybe later he's going to become religious. I don't know. Whatever the case may be, very good. Maybe become religious. Okay, but in the end, what could happen? What could happen? She doesn't become religious. She's not interested in conversion. Not interested in conversion. They married the wrong person. Right? But a person doesn't have to worry in general, this is not the right person for me. In spiritual terms. Right? Or your other, or that you worried your other spiritual half got taken. I don't have to worry about that. Why do I have to worry about that? Yeah. You don't have to worry about that. You want to, if someone has the right values and the right attitude and they're going in the right direction, there's nothing to be worried about. Nothing to worry someone else took it. Took my other half. Now, what if someone told me this, a while ago, that daughter got engaged, marriage is going to be in a couple of weeks. Should all go well. On paper, he told me his daughter and this guy, like, it's a match. Like, it's an absolute match. Like, he said nothing to talk about. Like, all the way down. It's like, check off all the boxes. Now, he got divorced. This guy got divorced, got remarried. And there are people that they've been married now, 8 years, 9 years, something like that. And there were a number of people said, I'll never last. There are too many things that they don't see eye to eye on. Too many things. Right? So this person always says, well, still here, 8 years later, still happily married, yeah. So, again, on paper, most people would probably say, "I'll never last." Yeah, but we don't do things by checking off the boxes. Yeah, if it's meant to be, even if they don't check off all the boxes, it could last. 100% it could last. But in this case, there are a number of boxes they don't check off, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because they get along in so many other ways that these other things are not going to take away from it. Right? But again, if you look at it as this person said on paper, no one would say it's a good match. So nobody would say it's a good match. But guess what? It's a good match. They're both happy. Yeah. Okay. Would I bet the farm that I don't have? Would I bet all the money I don't have on such a thing? No. I would also have been skeptical. Right? I went to the wedding. I went to the wedding. I have very close connection to this person. They're happy. Because someone asked me, do you think it's going to last? No. So I would have said it straight away. Yeah. And if he would have asked me, I would have told him. I said, I think you're playing with fire here. Whatever. Okay. And he says, awful PK, even so. I'm going to do it and it's going to work. Okay. I would have said wishful thinking because I think there are, too many other issues, but they worked them out. They worked out these other issues. Whatever they are. Okay. Would most people have said it's going to work? No. Come from two different worlds, in general. Yeah, very different worlds. Very different world outlooks in many ways. In other ways, they have a lot of things in common also. Okay. But religiously in the world, that world outlook is going to be problematic. Right? Could be very problematic. Okay. But they worked it out. However, they worked it out. So they're happily married. 8 years. Still going strong. So, she would ask some people or many people, they would have said, crazy. You're absolutely crazy. But, it can work. It can work. Someone said ice gel or frozen gel. Back on that. I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters if it's ice gel or frozen. The question's going to be, again, on Shabbos, the question is going to be, if it's a mild sprain or something major. If it's something major, you could use it, right? I wouldn't spread it. If it's a gel, that'd be a different issue of smearing, right? But we're talking about an ice pack. Yeah, if it's a frozen ice bag, you can do it. If it's frozen ice, you put it in a bag or whatever, you put it on it. If it's a major thing, you can do it. The minor thing, I would say no. Yeah, but if it's a gel, it would be more of a problem because, again, you're not allowed to spread it. If you just put it directly on, you don't spread it, it's one thing, right? And again, if it's a major thing, it would be okay as long as you don't spread it. Yeah, yourself. If it gets spread by itself, that's one thing, right? But if it's something minor, yeah, that would also be forbidden. Someone asked, please give a blessing, meet the right girl, 100%. Right? Anyone out there looking to get married, give a general blessing for everybody. That's definitely meet the right person, the right time, right? When it's supposed to be the right time, and nobody should be in doubt. Nobody should have any doubts. Also, yeah,
Amen.
meet the right person. It's the right person, right? It's the right person. That's it, right? Nothing worse than being in doubt. But everyone out there wants to meet the right person, 100%, 100%. Yeah, they got my blessing. That they should definitely meet the right person. Off subject. Okay, someone is very ill. Should the person not say refuah shleima as a Jew, rather saying things are good and good things will happen? For example, please feel better soon, relax, think good things, and feel better. You got to remember one thing. That is, God runs the world, right? So if God runs the world, even if someone has, let's say, a deadly disease, does that mean you can't wish them refuah shleima? I know someone now, a person, fortunately, 37 years old, got four little kids, and should be dead already, right? It's on, whatever, it's in a coma. And still got someone, still have refuah shleima. Now, it's wishful thinking, maybe, because doctors say there's no hope. He's going to die at some point. Doesn't mean God can't have mercy and cure them, but it's not wasted, right? If someone even has a debilitating disease and they're not going to come out of it, or whatever. So, say refuah shleima, saying that you should have a speedy recovery, right, does not mean that it's a waste, right? You're allowed to say that. Even if they're at death's door. And let's say you wish them refuah shleima, you wish them that they should have a full speedy recovery, very good, and a week later they die. That mean it was a waste? No. Why is it a waste? Because God can heal anyone at any time. Yeah, but they're at the end of the life, and doctors saying they got 2 days, 3 days, a week, a month, this, that. Okay, so what? So what? You can still wish them refuah shleima. You still wish that they have a speedy recovery. For sure you're allowed to do that. Right? It's not a waste. Right? No matter what the doctors say, God can intervene and have mercy. And because he has mercy, person maybe lasts another 6 months. Maybe lasts another 2 weeks. I don't know. Right? It never goes to waste. So even if you say refuah shleima, that you have a speedy recovery, it doesn't matter. Right? It's not forbidden. Certainly not forbidden. Yeah. Now, if you said refuah shleima, and the person dies, wasn't a waste. I saw somebody many, many years ago, and this person, whatever, was like ready to die. And they're like, just give me a casket, I'm ready to die, this and that. So when I saw them, I don't know, they didn't look so bad to me. They didn't look like they were at death's door, per se. And a week later they died. So, so I'm not gonna say I'm a good judge necessarily of that, but even wishing someone refuah shleima and they died 2 days later, a week later, it's not a waste. God can do anything. But if they, you don't say retroactively, well, you said they should have a speedy recovery and they died 2 days later. Okay. It's not a contradiction. 100% is not a contradiction. God wanted them to die. Okay. Right? But say we're foolish laymen, even if they're at death's door, doesn't matter. Right? You're allowed to. 100%. It's not forbidden. It's not forbidden if they die 2 days later, or a week later, or whatever it is. Right? It doesn't matter. What does the teach regarding halachic or regarding and thinking good things and good things will happen? According, there is what to be said for it. There is what to be said. In other words, positive thoughts can lead to positive things. Yeah. Though medically, that's been proven. If a person, let's say, has a dreaded disease, whatever it may be, they have a dreaded disease. Yeah, and they think negatively. They think totally negatively. Yeah. So if they think totally negatively, it could stop them from giving them the will to live. And because it stops them giving the will to live, what happens? They die quicker. So I know 2 cases of this. And I'm sure there are more. But I know 2 specific cases. One person had a stroke, couldn't do Sudoku anymore. So we told this story before. And this person gave up the will to live. Because they gave up the will to live, guess what? They didn't want to eat. They didn't want to drink. They were basically a skeleton. A few months later, they died in hospice. Because they didn't have the will to live. Now someone else had a stroke. And also, they didn't really want to go to rehabilitation. They didn't want to go through that whole process. They could have lived longer. Sure, they could have lived longer. But they gave up the will to live. So when a person gives up the will to live, it does not mean they're going to die tomorrow. But if you give up the will to live, what's going to happen? Your body will atrophy. You'll end up dying quicker. That's been proven medically. Now, at the same time, a person does everything they can and they have the desire to live. Could that extend their life? Yes. How much? I can't answer. But does that positive thought help them? Yes. Can it take away the disease entirely? I don't know. I wouldn't go that far. Right? But the person has cancer. They have the will to live. They change their diet. They do other things. Yeah, let's say they have the will to live. Now, does that mean they're gonna live, 6 months, a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later? You don't have any guarantee, right? But the attitude can change. It can change how a person looks at it, so to speak. You give them a longer life. Medically, that's been proven. Medically, 100% that's been proven, right? Attitude can extend a person's life. Yeah, bad attitude could kill them much quicker. So you want to ask me, halachically speaking, can the way a person looks at things change? Sure. 100%. Is it a guarantee? No. Not a guarantee. A person can have a good outlook. There are people who swear by this. Absolutely swear by this. I know someone gives class on this that she learned from Ravad Yosef's daughter, I think. Ravad Yosef, bless her, I think his daughter. I think it was his wife. I think it was his daughter that was very big in this. And she took a lot of these concepts and used it. And, speaks in a lot of different places. Perpetuating this. So there is what to be said for it. That there's no question. The issue is, again, do they see good things from it? No, people swear by it and say yes. The attitude is everything. Can't have ramifications. Now, does it mean it will? That's a different issue. That's a different issue. It has the power to, yes. So you want to pin me down? It asks me, does it have the power to change things in a positive way? Yes. Will it 100% of the time? Can't guarantee that. No one's going to guarantee that. It can certainly help. There's no question. That there's no question. So a person will say, can you see good things? Yes. Is it a guarantee you will? Like I say, it's a guarantee. But, some people really into this will say yes. Right? When you think positively, you see things in positive ways. Even if life is hard and difficult. That's what I would say. Someone asked about someone has strong chemistry with. Mom was a Russian Jew. Okay, gotta see if she's really Jewish or not. Is strong chemistry. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, unless you're going to convert, or if she's Jewish, then that's a problem, right? That would be a problem, right? So now a Jew cannot marry a Noahide, no matter how righteous they are. Yeah. So a Jew is a problem, right? Can a non-Jew technically marry a Jew? Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a Jew's fault for marrying them, right? But in this case, I would say that she's forbidden to you. 100% she's forbidden. She's Jewish, right? Right? If she has proof, that her mother's Jewish, yeah, then she can't marry. How can a Jew, even a secular Jew or someone, let's say, becoming more religious, whatever the case is, how can they marry a non-Jew, even a Noahide? It'd be forbidden. A Noahide can marry a Jew. That's not an issue. It's a problem for a Jew, right? That's 100% the problem for a Jew, not for a non-Jew. But in this case, yeah, if you're willing to convert, yeah, and if she's really Jewish, good, right? If not, then be forbidden for you. Sorry, be forbidden for her. Forbidden for her. Yeah. So now the question would be, did you transgress the prohibition of putting a stumbling block in front of someone? If it would go that far. Right? That doesn't apply to a non-Jew. The Jew makes their own decision. Okay, but at the end of the day, then I would say, there's good chemistry. Then if she's really Jewish, then if you want this relationship to go any further, then you have to convert. Then you have to convert. So it's not forbidden necessarily for you, it's forbidden for her. Right? But if this relationship's gonna go anywhere, then you'd have to convert. Are the vows taken in a Christian marriage binding after one converts? No. It doesn't bind them in anything. If a Jew, let's say, gets baptized, right? They pour a little bit water on them, or they dunk them in a river, I don't know, whatever they do. Yeah, does that change the status of a Jew? No. They get wet. They get a little bit wet or a lot wet, but it doesn't change anything. Right? So even if someone's a Christian, they give up Christianity, right? They repent, they give up Christianity, they made Christian vows, they took communion, they did all these other things. Once they convert, all those things are meaningless. All those things have no power whatsoever on anybody, right? On them. Won't have any power on them. So if they convert, once the person comes out of idolatry, right, even before conversion, and they disavow idolatry, whatever they've done before, that gets wiped out. That will get wiped out. Yeah, so therefore, whatever they did in such a case, whether they're a Buddhist, Christian, or who knows what, whatever they took on is gone. Gone, though. Right? So even before conversion, if there's proper repentance, it's gone. So you don't have to worry about it. After conversion, all the more so. Right? Once the person converts, they're considered like a newborn baby. Right? They're considered like a tinok shel nolad damin, considered like a newborn baby. Yeah, so that means everything they did up until that point is wiped out. Totally wiped out. So that you don't have to worry about. You don't have to worry about, it's not even conversion. You don't have to worry about that. Right? Even before conversion, it would get wiped out. How about a person who is grieving parents? Do you say, think good and good things will happen? It seems like it lacks mercy. Someone who's grieving parents, yeah, it's a hard thing. It's not a question of lacking, lacking mercy. I wouldn't say call it that. But, what happens where you see negative things in parents or family members, right? Parents are a good example. Parents, siblings. Let's say a sibling does something, I spoke about this last week, right? My Q&A, about someone who you say should do the right thing, right? By inheritance. But who says they have to? They'll say I have a legal document, right? Why not split a 50-50? This was what the way it was. Right? And that's it. Now, what does the person think? They think their brother should give them half. Okay. Will they? I don't think so. But at the end of the day, now what are they thinking? They're thinking all these negative things about the parents or about the father. Right? Because now he got messed up in this inheritance. And he got less. So now he's got all these negative thoughts, and the reason he's got these negative thoughts is because he was less loved than his brother. This is real. It's not it's not a joke. So it brings up all these negative feelings. thinking that they're second class and not, father never loved them as much. Father showed favoritism to the other brother. So what does that do? It brings up a lot of negativity, right? A lot of negativity. So my answer was that you got to try and see the positive also. Now, I'm not going to be so easy over here. Yeah. Well, you don't want to knock out everything. You can say, oh, the father was, this, and he thought about this. And, it brings up a lot of negativity. True. Brings out a lot of negativity. But at the end of the day, right, what does the person feel? Person feel like, let's say they were lied to. Person wasn't honest. Yeah, it brings up a lot of negativity. A lot of negativity. Right? So my simple answer was, yeah, you're going to feel the negativity. You're 100% now. Everything happened in your childhood, you're going to second guess now. It's like, oh, but yeah, my father loved my other brother better. He showed favoritism this way. Right? It was always forbidden to do. But yeah, okay, this is what happened. So I said you could take that memory and just have all negative memories because of it. And and after the fact say the person wasn't good to me. I love my brother more. And just, totally hate the father because of it. Right? Or, you can say that's what he felt. Doesn't make you feel, doesn't mean you're a piece of dirt. Right? Even if that's what he felt, he can still see the good. Didn't hate you. He says, okay, he thinks your brother's better. Right? He thinks your brother's better. Now, you could say, well, it's not true. And there are different reasons why it's not true. Yeah, it deflates the person. Totally deflates the person. Yeah, which I can understand. So my simple answer was, either you can take the negativity totally to heart and hate your father for it for the rest of your life, which I don't think is good. On the other hand, you can say, okay, that's what he felt. It hurts, it stings, but you also have good memories. You also have some good memories, right? If you don't have any good memories, okay, but he has good memories, right? So if he's got good memories, I wouldn't harp on the negativity. Yeah, I wouldn't harp on, I understand it's painful, 100%. I understand it's painful, right? But you have to let the pain go. You have to say, okay, that's what he felt. You didn't think he was right. Let's say you think you got the short end of the stick, in other ways. You try to make up for it in other ways. Okay, whatever it is. Let's say it didn't amount to it enough. Let's say. Let's say. So you want to feel bad for the rest of your life? You want to let it take you down, the rest of your life? You could. The person can rip roaring mad. I can't believe my father did that. I'm not going to do anything for his memory. I'm not going to. Oh, you can do that. The problem is you can't hate anybody in your heart in general. Yeah, if you're abused or something else, you could. Right? But I'm saying, yeah, this stings. This 100% stings. Yeah, I understand. So either you could harbinge the hatred, the anger, let's say better, the anger in your heart, you're going to feel like you're second class compared to your brother. Yeah. Or you can say, okay, that's what he felt. I think it was mistaken. It didn't, now you see after the fact I wasn't treated the way I could have been and whatever. Okay, that stings. That's painful. That's painful. On the other hand, there's a way to be able to see good in it also. Right? So, one of the ways is the person never been trained in any of this, doesn't know anything from Torah. You make a mistake. You say, well, Yaakov made the same mistake. With Joseph, right? Gave him the coat of many colors. So the reasons why he did it. And all his children were righteous. So kind of, but there was jealousy there. But he made them jealous for a reason. One explanation is he wanted to show how great Joseph was and to learn from him. Right? In the end, made them jealous and caused all kinds of other issues. Okay. But comparing kids is never good. And if you say it during the lifetime, that's worse. Why can't you be like your brother? Why can't you be like your sister? Why do that's a kiss of death. That's a kiss of death, because a kid will hate a sibling for it. They'll be jealous of their sibling. Oh, this sibling always can never do anything wrong. right? And you get the short end of the stick. No matter what you do, it's like, oh, you're compared to this other sibling. That's wrong. That's totally wrong, right? Now, this person understands he was loved less. That's painful. That 100% is painful. So I said, but if you see the bigger picture, right, that's the wrong thing to do, right? To treat one kid better than another. It's forbidden, right? Totally forbidden. Again, we come up with different explanations why Yaakov did it. Okay, but it's forbidden in general. It's going to make someone jealous. It's going to cause other problems, right? Very good. So now, the person can look at this and say, this is painful. Then it second guesses everything that happened when I was a child and blah, 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 brings up a lot of negativity, right? Which, a person's trying to unravel, trying to unravel. But if you weren't brought up in Torah mitzvahs, is it a common mistake? Yeah, it could be. Very well, it could be. Now, the question is, how do you want to react? How in the world do you want, you can hate your father for life. You could take, you could hold this grudge, this major grudge, which is forbidden, by the way, in the Torah, which again is not an easy thing, which I told them. You can totally hate them. Absolutely can hate them, despise them. Is that going to help anything? Not going to help anything. Right? So you try and find the good somewhere. It's all bad. Now it makes them second guess everything. Okay. Was it all bad? It's not all bad. You never did anything good. You never hung out together. You never saw your kids. You never this. Right? You try and think of the goods. Right? This will sting. I get it. Question is how long you let it sting. How long, it has to be unraveled. Because that calls in a lot of things to question. Okay. Yeah, so that was my, again, I'm not a psychologist by, any stretch, but if you're going to harbor this in your heart, you're going to be miserable. You're going to be miserable, right? And this person, till they die, they'll hate their father because of it. Can't do that. Again, I'm not talking about where they're abusive and other things. I'm not talking about that, right? And, in this case, it changes the way they think now. Change the way the father thought of them. Yeah, it does. It's true. But how much you going to how much you going to harp on it? What are you going to say? It's nothing good? You say you got the short end of the stick on this deal. Okay. He could have left you nothing. Right? Significant amount of money. Okay. Yeah, I'm not saying that's all parents for. It's how much they're going to leave you when they die. Right? If they do have anything. Yeah. That's not okay. Certainly helped you. Yeah. No question. Person was a giving person, a good father, let's say in general. This stings though. I'm not saying no, it stinks. Right? But you got to look at it in the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is what? There's nothing good. Nothing now your father did was ever good. But you're questioning it. I get it. Does that mean nothing ever good came out of it? Nothing. Hard to say. I wouldn't think so. But you have to unravel the feelings, and now a person feels like he never really loved me that much. Or he didn't love me as much as my brother, but doesn't mean he didn't love you. Certainly doesn't, And what do you do if someone can't show emotion? Doesn't mean they don't love you. They have an issue showing emotion. Okay. Don't you wish they could be more touchy-feely, cuddly, and all that? Yeah. But some people are not like that. Yeah. So a person can look at it in different ways. Oh, my father never, my mother never loved me. No, they did not show emotion. Doesn't mean they didn't love you. They loved you in their way. Yeah, but if they've never taught to show emotion, or it was handed down to them about emotion and this and that, so you can't expect it. Right? And that's one of the things I said. And I mentioned in the Q&A that someone's up and trained this way or looks at the world that way, you can't expect them. I said, someone, let's say, needs the money, or if they don't need the money, how can you expect they're going to give their share? How are you going to expect they're going to give 50-50? Right? It was 70-30. Yeah, how are you going to expect 50-50? You can't expect that. Right? Someone in general was, not good at giving. Why, even if you need the money, you can explain it to them. Say, listen, I really need the other thing. But what's the other person going to say? He says, we can sign a document. You can't fight it in court or lose. They get killed in court. Yeah, and even the money you're supposed to get is going to be used in court fees, so like lawyer fees. So that doesn't make any sense, right? But on the other hand, person should do the right thing. Very good. Are they going to do the right thing? I doubt it. They're the same. Signed documents. Too bad. That's what Dad thought. Deal with it. Painful. You're also talking about a serious chunk of money, but it's painful. Yeah, but you can't expect somebody, and this is my answer. I spoke about this a lot my last Q&A. I did on Thursday, and that is you cannot expect someone to do something they're not capable of doing it. You can want it, you can do it, say anything you want, right? If they're not capable of doing it, you can't have a claim against them. We're talking about someone who's narcissistic. If they're narcissistic, you can't have a claim against them. It's a mental disease, right? It's a mental health issue. Unless they go through serious therapy, they're not going to change. They will not change. So how can you expect them to care about what you do or what you say if that's who they are? That's their mental health state. You can't expect it. So you have to work within their world, which is painful. They'll never pat you on the back. They'll never say a good thing. It's all about what revolves in their life. So that's what you have to deal with. Or you don't speak to them. Right? So I said, you have a choice. The part of the brother's not going to give them, their fair share, what they think is their fair share. Then I said, you got a choice. When the dust settles with the rest of the money, either speak to them or not speak to them. Or not have anything to do with them. It's your choice. But it's bearing a grudge. But, if this person wasn't giving person anyway, what do you expect? Someone, let's say siblings got a lot of money. They could fork over their share of whatever they're going to get. They won't do it. Of course they won't do it. Why not? Because you got money. You want more money. The sibling needs it much more than you. They don't care. You can't teach a person to care. We can try. You cannot teach a person who never shows emotion to show emotion. Major therapy maybe can help with that. But in general, they weren't brought up that way. That's the way they've been. You can't expect certain things. That was my answer. And to try and expect certain things is like trying to squirt milk out of a lemon. Good luck. Right? No matter how much you squeeze the lemon, ain't milk coming out of it. Right? Try it. It won't happen. If it does, I got someone you can speak to. But it's never going to happen. Never going to happen. So you can't have those expectations. So my answer was, if you choose not to speak to the person again because he won't do it, you bring it up, he won't do it, or he's not going to do it, so you're not going to bother. Okay, it's your choice. It's wrong, but it's your choice. According to the Torah, I understand you're hurt. Yeah. And the person, maybe should do it. But you don't have a case in court. You don't have a case in Jewish court either. Secular court or Jewish court. You got to sign documents. That's it. That's what he decided to do. Okay. You don't have to like it. But you can't expect the other person, to share if you're not capable. But it stings. I understand. She has a cross on her neck. She don't know what's Passover. I don't know if her Jewish, his mom is Jewish. Okay, then you have to find out. Then you would have to find out if she's legitimately Jewish or not. But you have to have the same values. That's the bottom line. She wears a cross, then it's kind of an issue. And see, is she really a Christian or she just wears it? Right? You can get along in many other different ways, but this is pretty crucial. Let's say she's not Jewish. Let's say she's not Jewish. Yeah, so now you want to pursue it further. Then you have to, ask the question, okay, what are you going to do about religion? What do you want to do about, let's say, if we, having kids? How would you raise them? Those are the questions you have to ask, right? If she's not Jewish. She is Jewish, that's a different issue, right? That'd be a different issue. But if she's Jewish, why is she wearing a cross? Now, again, if she's really Jewish. Staying in a mourning state prevents you from living life today, right? Right? And, having things in your heart and bearing a grudge also takes years off your life. Any psychologist will tell you that. But you say, I have a right to do it. Person made me angry. I know someone, I mentioned the story before, 15 years more. Still upset from bad business advice. Okay, you gotta move. Any psychologist will tell you gotta move on with life. No, I can understand. You know, they went bankrupt. They lost their business. Nobody was there for them. Nobody gave them a good word. No one patted them on the back. No one gave them a hug. I get it. No one showed any emotion. Okay, it's like being thrown on the floor and say, wow, that must have hurt, and you walk away. That's painful. That's extremely painful. Yeah, I get it. But, you gotta move on. These people are not capable, right? We said this many times. If people are not capable of showing this emotion, now, is it painful? Yes. You're not asking them for money to bail you out. You're not talking about that. Just a good word, something. A hug, or sorry this happened, blah, blah, blah. Let's say you get nothing. That's worse, right? It's bad enough. It's like I told someone, I said, when someone's dying, you don't kick him in the head, right? Okay, so this person didn't get kicked in the head, but you know what happened? Nobody was there for them. Nobody. Right? They have nothing to do with their family now. Most of their family. Yeah. I'm not saying it's right. I understand they're angry. Makes perfect sense. But you're burying that grudge for what? Why are you burying the grudge? You got someone who's got the IQ of a doornail or a doorknob. Yeah. That's where their IQ. They have 25 IQ. You can't expect someone with a 25 IQ who's mentally challenged. I won't say the R word. They're mentally challenged. You can't expect it. You cannot expect it. If you do expect it, you're a fool. They're not capable. If they're not capable, they're not capable. Painful. But you can't let it get you down in life. If someone's not capable, they're not capable. Someone's got a mental health order, disease, they're not going to change. Not going to go for help. You can't help that. It's not your fault. They are limited. We're all limited in different ways, right? So I got to take it to heart. I don't take any of these things to heart anymore. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of energy. Yeah, this is who they are. This is what they say. Okay, try and make it better. You try this. What can you do? Nothing to do. Nothing to do. You can't squeeze milk out of a lemon. That's it. You can try. It's never going to work. So if someone's not capable, so again, that was part of my answer also. Said if they're not capable, you can't expect it. And they've never been capable in this area. So what do you expect? All of a sudden they're going to, with a serious chunk of money, they're going to change? They're not going to change. Not only are they not going to change, you can plead hardship. It's not going to help you. Because what are they going to say? I got a signed document. I have a signed document. What do you want? They'll flush you in any court. In any court you go to, you're finished. They should do the right thing. Why would they? What's in their interest to do the right thing? They have no interest to do the right thing. They don't think it's the right thing. Right? Just the opposite. Dad gave me more. He wanted me to have more, not you. So I'm going to uphold what Dad said. And he was in his right mind when he did it. You don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear that. It's favoritism. Yeah. And even if he did it, he could answer that. He could say, I'm upholding, and there is what to be said, to be Chaim divrei hameis, to establish the words of that person. Right here, you got the document. So what do you want? I'm only upholding what Dad would have wanted. He didn't want you to have as much. Oh, that stings. That stings. Imagine if he got cut out altogether. Right? And the sibling says, why should I give you anything? They didn't want you to have it. That stings. That stings. He's got something more than nothing. Okay. But nobody wants to hear that. Well, that's what Mom and Dad wanted. You were supposed to get 10%. 15%, I was supposed to get 80%. Or whatever it is. You don't want to hear that's painful. Right? You can still see the good, though. It's going to be harder to. But you can still see the good. Yeah, if there is any good. You still be able to see the good. This stings, though. We can't, someone here says you can't, I mean, Rebbe says, you live in the past, you have no future. You can't dwell on it. Because if you dwell on it, it'll make you sick. Literally, it'll make you sick. It'll make you think about all kinds of things you don't want to think of. You don't want to bring up. It's painful. Right? You got to take it in stride and try and see positive things from it. Some things, it's very hard to see positive. It's hard. I'm not going to say it's easy. I'm not going to say you might not need therapy. Right? But it's painful. 100% it's painful. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I'm gonna stop here. I do this every Saturday. Look at that, no sirens, at least for now. So I'm gonna stop here. I do this every Saturday, 2 o'clock Eastern time, 9 o'clock. Israel time next week actually will be an hour earlier because states are changing the clocks. So anyone who doesn't change the clocks will be an hour earlier. Starting next week, and any class I give next week will be that way also. So anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Kaufman.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Orthodox Conversion Judaism, OrthodoxConversion.com. If you're on Orthodox Conversion to Judaism on YouTube, there I get videos of Q&As, Ethics for Fathers, Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, Rabbi Chaim Kaufman at gmail.com, RBBI, CHAIM, COFFMAN at gmail.com, whichever good. Beginning of the day, middle of the day, end of the day.